Hello, governor. That's my intro. Paddington is directed by Paul King, written by him and Hamish McCall. It's based on the Paddington Bear books by Michael Bond. Features the voice of Ben Whishaw internationally, but locally he was voiced by Cian Lim, and also stars Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins, and Nicole Kidman. And Paddington is about this young bear from darkest Peru who's forced to leave his home, and he finds himself in England, and he has to find like a family to take him in. And the Brown family reluctantly take him into their household. And while they search for the explorer that his uncle, Paddington's uncle and aunt used to know, this taxidermist played by Nicole Kidman goes on the hunt, trying to hunt Paddington down and well stuff him. And Paddington was a huge surprise. I really, really enjoyed watching this movie. It has lots of visual style to spare, but more than that, it has this really family-friendly tone and really, really great humor, as well as really good performances all throughout. Now, Paddington himself, the bear, the character model, is extremely detailed visually speaking. Like, you can really see every single strand of fur on him. His eyes are extremely expressive, and he interacts well with the environment, from everything from shadows and lighting, to just the dampness of his fur, as he goes through different environments and like as his fur gets wet and whatnot. But the thing I was most impressed by visually speaking was actually the production design in this movie, which was extremely quirky and very, very inventive, loaded with visual gags, and just tiny details that further character. Like there's this one scene where the Brown household is kind of described, like every character in the Brown household is described, and you see it as just like a cross section of a dollhouse. And every person is in their individual room, and each room is like really kind of tailored to each character's personality. And it was a really great way to kind of get to know the characters without really going through too much exposition and whatnot. But the funniest thing I remember, production design wise, was when you meet the character of Nicole Kidman, who's this taxidermist. You see her in her office, and there are the heads of the animals sticking throughout the walls. But then she goes into another room, and the camera follows her, and it shows the rest of the bodies of the animals. So like their butts are hanging out. So it's really funny. I don't know. The way this movie is edited, also by editor Mark Everson, I think is cool in that gives equal focus to each member of the family and the relationships with Paddington. And like even the smaller supporting characters, I think, are given enough screen time to make them memorable and also make them feel essential to the telling of the story. And you really do begin to care about each of these characters, that in the later moments of the movie it actually becomes somewhat tense, like you kind of will know where the story is going to go, but it's a testament to how well the writing and the editing and the directing is, that you care so much about these characters that you don't want them to get hurt. And speaking of the story of Paddington really is a very kind of simple and predictable sort of fish out of water story. But if you know me, I don't care about predictability. I think that if you use a formula but tell it extremely well, then I don't care. It's not even like a negative to me anymore. And I think, this kind of story works well because it's really the best kind of template for, this kind of, family friendly sort of tale. Like you need something simple to really get the universal themes across and whatnot. You could also argue, if you're cynical, that most of the characters here are very one note. But again, I think that this is not a bad thing, and that actually works for this kind of story because it allows for complexity to arise not in the characters themselves but in their relationships with each other. And this movie really is all about how these people view Paddington differently. Some of them don't want him in the house. Some of them really kind of welcome him with open arms. It's really nice to see that. And this movie is very, very funny in a very kind of dry British way. But this British humor kind of goes well with the visual gags and some of the slapstick stuff. For the most part, the slapstick stuff works. Now, the thing I was really afraid of going into this movie was that Cian Lim would be, not that good as Paddington. I don't even know why we replaced Ben Wishaw's voice with Cian Lim. But he actually did do a good job. He was not a distraction like I thought he was going to be. It's obvious that he's dubbed over, you can really tell, but you can tell also that he really kind of put in effort to try and play this character. So, I really have to give credit to him. Hugh Bonneville is surprisingly really funny in this movie. He goes to certain comedic lengths that are just hilarious. He's very easy to root for despite his being kind of stuck up, his character, I mean, in the movie. Sally Hawkins is just absolutely impossible to dislike. I love Sally Hawkins. And she really has that whole inner strength an optimism thing going about her despite the things that happen around her. Nicole Kidman is obviously having a lot of fun as this really kind of campy villain of sorts. And one other person who's surprisingly really funny in this movie is Peter Capaldi, who has this really small role as the neighbor of the Browns, and he's just really, really great in every single scene he's in. And the way Paul King directs this movie is like how I think every single kid's or family thing should be directed, in the sense that it's always good natured without being manipulative. And it's always the way he directs it is very dynamic without it being overly silly. Because there are certain points in this movie, like at the beginning when they're at Darkest Peru, or there's a certain point where Paddington is kind of like seeing a story being told through like the things in the room. Like those things, those moments were so incredibly inventive, and they really kind of play on the imagination of kids, but they're also fun to watch if you're older, an adult. It's also credit to King for being able to establish chemistry between live actors and a CGI bear. Like you really do believe their relationships, and you can choose to see the story as a tale of like a foreigner being accepted by society. But you know, King never forces an interpretation on you. You can really just watch this as a family thing, and it will work pretty well. As for issues I have with the movie, I do think that there's certain goofy moments and some slapstick humor that does go on a bit too long. It just does not fit well, in my opinion, sometimes with the British style humor. And there are like little negatives that it naturally result from the movie being kind of short and really aimed at kids. You know, like I kind of wish they spent more time talking about Paddington's uncle and aunt, about the character of Nicole Kidman. I kind of wanted more from that, but whatever. I still think though that Paddington is a great movie. It's one of those movies that you go in expecting absolutely nothing, and then it just completely takes you by surprise, and you leave the theater like just smiling. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Paddington. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.